Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Betty Kime. I am the former education coordinator for the Bartlesville Area History Museum, and I'm going to be giving a presentation today on outstanding Bartlesville women and of the area. So, our first person is going to be wonderful Nanny Journeycake Pratt Bartles, and she is one of the greatest pioneers of our area, and she was born in 1843 and married Lucian Pratt in 1860, and they had 3 children. They were Noni, Ella Mae, and Ida, and regretfully Lucian passed away in 1865, and 3 years later she married Jacob Bartles, our town's namesake, who accepted her 3 children as his own. And after the death of their first child, Charles, they ended up moving to the Yellow Leaf Ford on the Verdigris River. It was near Alloway, where Jacob established a sawmill before moving to Silver Lake in 1873. Nanny had received her education at the Delaware Baptist Mission at Denison, Kansas, and the Baptist College in Granville, Ohio. So she was a very educated woman and very, very religious. Once settled at the Silver Lake, she quickly went to work in establishing educational and religious opportunities for her family and others in the area. Nanny held religious services at the Bartles home on the north bank of the Caney River. And then later they ended up moving to the Dewey Hotel and started Dewey. So our next person is Sarah Ann Rogers Carr. So she was born November 30th, 1848. From Oklahoma Chronicles, there's a really nice little section, and so I'm going to read it to you. Nelson had heard many glowing reports concerning the beautiful and talented daughter of the Rogers family, Sarah Ann. He decided he should look into this matter, and on his 22nd birthday, September 2nd, 1866, he saddled his favorite pony and rode down to the timber hill for a visit with his friend, Mr. Rogers. He discovered Miss Rogers to be even more beautiful and charming than he had hoped for. And if the young man had ever entertained thoughts of being a bachelor, those thoughts were soon gone. And after courtship of nearly a year, they were married on August 26, 1867. In the Timber Hill area by Reverend David Stanfield. So Sarah was very, very sweet and kind and very supportive of her husband. And when he had a trading post, she ended up staying there while he was away and helped to do the business there. As also, remember, this is a very wild area, and she was all by herself. But anyway, then later on they had more help. But after their trading post had been ransacked by some Native Americans, he decided, I don't think I want to have a trading post anymore. And so he established the grist mill that is on the Caney River. But anyway, then he ended up going into farming and ranching, and later oil became a big thing. They had 8 children, and she passed away on August 4th, 1929, and is buried at the White Rose Cemetery Mausoleum. Grandma Patiacow, and Mary Thursday, they were both Delaware women who came at the beginning, and they owned quite a bit of property. Mary is buried on her farm, which is located behind a house on the edge of town, around Johnstone and Osage. And Mary owned much of the southern part of the town, around Osage and Johnstone. But those are one of our founding people. Our next one is a really interesting woman. Her name is Maw-Wa-Taise, and she lived to be 109 years old. She was the keeper of the dolls for the Delaware tribe, and she always told her story at the closing ceremony of the big celebration. Her mother died in a flooded river, and she was swept away when she was only 5. And she was kept alive by a spotted woodpecker. A mermaid said that she would be a Maw-Wa-Taise's guardian and would return to her exactly 1 year before she was to pass away. And it happened. But since then, no, they didn't have, she had these dolls, and they were very important to the Delaware tribe. But no one in her family was able to carry these dolls on, so they had them buried with her, and she's buried in the Beck Cemetery. But this is Carrie Armstrong, Overlees, and she moved. She was born in Kansas in 1929, and in 1857. She was a member of the Delaware tribe, and moved with them to Indian Territory in 1867. She grew up in Alloway, Indian Territory. If you notice, some of the people from the Delawares, some of them were living over in Alloway before they moved to the Bartlesville area. And she taught school. In 1877, she taught at Silver Lake, which is on the south side of our town. And in 1884, she taught in Bartlesville. 1889, she taught at Cootie's Bluff. She was very religious and taught Sunday school for 41 years. She managed the Right Way Hotel with her husband in 1898. She married Francis Marion Overlees, her parents were Mary Elizabeth Journeycake, another one of the Journeycakes, and Charles H. Armstrong. She had children Earl Ray and William Edward and Milo Haskell. But she was a very, her family was very strong and important to our area. She passed away on March 29th, 1935. Here's good old Nellie, and I love this picture. This is a picture of Nellie and her older sister. And then, let's see, the land where the Nellie Johnstone oil well was drilled actually belonged to Nellie, because each person in the of the Native Americans had an allotment, and the well was built on her allotment. So it was the first commercial oil well in Indian Territory. One of my favorite stories is about Nellie. When she was a teenager, they used to go skating on the Caney River, which you cannot do today. But she would go skating, and there was a group of them, and they got cold. So when you get cold, what do you do? One of the things was to build a fire. So they decided to build a fire. They didn't realize that the oil well was leaking. And so as soon as they started that fire, the oil went up to the oil well and burned it down. So they scattered because they don't want to be known as the people that burned the oil well down. And she didn't admit until years later that she was one of the culprits that burned it down. But anyway, then later she married Howard Cannon and was prominent in many ladies' clubs, churches, and organizations. Here she is dressed in her Native American outfit. It's beautiful. And you can actually see that outfit at the Maw-Wa-Taise Historical Museum. It's beautiful. This is Anna Anderson Davis. Now she was a Delaware girl. She was born November 6, 1897 in Indian Territory, northeast of Dewey, to parents Samuel and Josephine Anderson. She grew up with her maternal grandparents, which is a tradition that they would do a lot with a lot of the tribes. The grandparents would take care of the children. So this was William and Mary, Mary Brown was who she lived with. Anna Anderson life took an interesting turn when the Phillips brothers came, and they wanted to dwell on her land. So now the Phillips, they had been doing more when it comes to financial things. And they decided, ooh, let's get in on this oil. And so they had drilled a couple of different oil wells, and they were bust. They were dry. So they had just enough money to drill one more. So they decided to drill it in Anda's place, and it was a gusher. So she became a very rich young lady. And so she would have to, a lot of the Native Americans had guardians. So she had a guardian that took care of her money, and that was Frank Phillips. So she would have to go in to be able to ask for any money, anything that she wanted. The bank, she said she always felt scared going into the bank to ask for money, but he was always very generous and gave her anything that she really wanted. But anyway, so later on, let's see, let's get the next part. She went to she got her education at Patiacow in Oklahoma. It was an Oklahoma Indian boarding school, and then she went to Haskell, which is up in Kansas, for more education. She married Conrad O. Davis and in 1914, and she was president of the Indian Territory Pioneer Association, a charter member of the Indian Women's Club, and was involved in the New Hope Indian Methodist Church and keeping Delaware powwows going. She famously made a pair of moccasins for all of the executives of the Phillips Petroleum Company. And Anna's great-grandfather was Chief Anderson, and he was a very famous Native American. And there were towns in Indiana and Missouri that are named after him. But she was a very sweet woman. And she did so much to help on the history of the area, because she was in the Washington County Historical Society, and she helped to keep everything going about our history. So she's one of those history heroes. Okay, Cindy Parker. Cindy Parker was an early pilot and married Billy Parker. And Eleanor Ruth Reed was born on May 9th, 1899 in Redwood, California. Billy and Eleanor were married May 29th, 1918. She learned to fly in 1929 at the Bartlesville airport, and Billy and Eleanor, and only she was called Cindy with a big D on on her name, and they had 3 boys, William Jr., Milton, and Torrance. But can you imagine being a young aviator back when they were still learning to be able to fly and to have those small old airplanes? And also, her husband, he was a pilot here, and he was in charge of the Dewey Airplane Factory, which was during World War II or World War I. They had an airplane factory. They didn't build too many airplanes, but because by the time they got it started, World War I was basically over with. But so this lady was quite an interesting person. Kay Little a lot of times does a story on her. But her name is Julia Johnson, Whiteturkey, possibly, Gilstrap, Lewis, Dalton, possibly Johnson. So, I'm not going to do the full story of her, but she was a wild woman. Julia was one of the phrases was, they said she was a beautiful, raven-haired woman, as reckless and headstrong as any man, with a quick temper which flared into a rage with the slightest provocation. From an early age, she could handle a horse and a gun with ease, And as we will see, she wasn't so bad with men either. So Julia was coming out here to Indian Territory, and she ended up, they say, and met Emmett Dalton, and she was kind of infatuated with him from the beginning. Now remember, Emmett Dalton used to be a U.S. Deputy Marshal until he went the other way. But anyway, so she was at least married 4 times. But it has been said that her first husband may have been Albert Whiteturkey, but they don't have proof of it, and other people disagree that she really was not married to him. But if she was, it might have been to be able to stay in this territory. Whatever the case is, it's clear that she married Robert Gilstrap, a Cherokee, in 1887. This is the marriage from which her daughter, Jenny Gilstrap, was later Perrier came. This marriage was short-lived, lasting just under 2 years, ending with a Christmas Eve shootout in front of the Bartles store between Gilstrap and a man named Frank Leno. Legend has it that Mr. Leno might have been Julia's love interest, which would account for the gunfight, which they take care of things back then. Trial records state that Gilstrap tried to persuade Leno to back down, but to no avail. Not much of a gunslinger before he could commence doing away with his wife's lover. Gilstrap had to first buy the bullets. By marriage, number 3, Julia had not improved her marital skills, and about 1901 or 1902, she took the leap with Onus Lewis, a fairly notorious no-good doer, one acquainted with local law enforcement. When Oklahoma joined the Union, they had made it a dry state, and he had basically a bar. And they had come to him beforehand saying, you need to stop serving any liquor. And he didn't agree with that. So his bar, his saloon, was a 3rd and Keeler. And U.S. Marshals came, and they told him you had to shut down. Well, he didn't listen to them. And when she learned, and so they entered this saloon to assist Lewis in that overlooked commission, and that's when the deadly shooting broke out. A multitude of stories have been told as to how the event transpired, but one thing is clear: Julia became a widow again. So when she learned about that, she reportedly went to the inquest and stopped by the coroners before entering. She stuck a gun in his belly and warned him that she would take revenge on the man she alleged murdered her husband. That man was former U.S. Marshal Fred Keeler. And she had said that she was wanting to put the man who murdered the murderer of him was Fred Keeler, but they didn't let her say murdered, but he was shot by Fred Keeler. But she was something else. And anyway, she ended up marrying Emmett Dalton, and they lived happily together. They went out to California and made a movie, but and then he passed away, and so supposedly she may have married a Johnson again, to go full circle. Okay. Ruby Darby, she's one of my favorites. She was a showgirl and a half, and so she had she was called the Oil Rush Queen of the oil fields. An oil field gusher got to be called a Ruby Darby, or a Darb. Ruby Darby was was an early 1900s stripper and blues singer. Her show boasted of 16 chorus girls. Normally they only had 8. And she was one of the early blues singers. And she had a beautiful voice. Apparently she would strip in oil camps, private parties, and tool shack groups, wherever she got a chance. And she was hired by Jane Phillips to entertain at John Phillips's birthday party also. She advertised by putting on a fur coat, supposedly naked underneath, and speeding through town in a red car, so that she could get arrested, so that would cause all the uproar, so that people would all come to her show, and they did. All the men came, of course, to see all of the ladies and to see her, but the women, they came to make sure that the men paid attention and were also being good. So anyway, but she was a very good business person, and she was quite the woman. And one of my favorites, this is Olive Stokes Mix. She was born in north of Dewey, west of Dewey, and anyway, she was born in 1887, April 10th, and her parents were J.A. and Joy J. Stokes. Well, she learned to be able to ride and rope and shoot as good as any man. Believe me, she could. And then she was quite the dynamite of a woman. She ended up falling in love with Tom Mix. And first of all, she met him at the World's Fair. And then she didn't see him for 4 years. And then he went up to North Dakota, where she was, and ended up getting married with her. She thought it was a joke at first that he was marrying her, but it wasn't. They got married. But anyway, so they were happily married for a while, and they both loved riding and roping and performing. Well, he ended up being, he and her both got contracts for the movies. And so they went to LA. And she decided, that really wasn't her thing too much. And so she went ahead and didn't make any more movies. But Tom, of course, made over 300 films. He was the king of the cowboys, and he made more money than any other actor at one point. But then, of course, when you have a movie, you've got the hero, and you have the poor, sweet maiden that needs to be the damsel in distress. Well, there was a really nice damsel in distress, and he married her. He divorced Olive and married her. But Olive lived in LA for years and years, and she knew everybody, and everybody knew her. Some of her really good friends were Elvis and Walt Disney, and all kinds, and John Wayne. But she continued to love him her whole life. But anyway, this is good Aunt Jane Gibson Phillips. So Jane Phillips was born in 1877. Her father was a banker in Iowa, and they ended up falling in love. So he offered Frank a job, and also when they were married in February 18th, 1897. Gave them, oops, I've just lost that, $3,000, and that helped them to be able to get established. But she was a very sweet, kind woman. They always called her Aunt Jane, and she did a great deal of charitable activities and was affectionately known as Aunt Jane. One quote said, "Aunt Jane had the gift of kindness and gave freely of it." And they had one son, John Phillips, and they had 2 foster children. But Jane had wanted to build a children's hospital. And when she passed away, the Phillips Frank Phillips Foundation gave $2 million to the city of Bartlesville to be able to build the Jane Phillips Memorial Hospital. So, this is Martha Jane Phillips Starr. And she was the daughter of L.E. Phillips, which was the brother of Frank, and also helped to run Phillips Petroleum and their banks and all the other things. This is a picture of her in their backyard. They had a Japanese garden, and then that's a picture of her when she was older. So she was a great philanthropist and donated an immense amount of money through her foundation to create the Bartlesville Area History Museum, as well as grants to continue to improve the museum. Martha married John Wilbur Twink, which is an interesting name, Starr, a geologist working with her father. After the wedding, the couple lived in Bartlesville for a time, and then they ended up moving to Kansas City, and that's where they lived. But she volunteered as the chairman of the Nurses' Aid during the war, and after John returned, they went to Kansas City. Let's see. This is Marie Dahlgren Foster Burlingame, and when she was young, her and her sister were pretty famous, and they had an act that they did with her sister Alma, and they were making names for themselves as dancers in vaudeville, no less. And H.V. Foster saw her, and he was kind of smitten, so they ended up dating, and they became married, and they were married May 1st, 1907. They first lived in Chicago, and their daughters were Mary and Ruth. They made Bartlesville their home and were extremely generous to the community, but they did it anonymously. After H.V. died, Marie married Charles Burlingame, who was another very rich, famous person from our area, and she passed away November 25th, 1983. And they had built oops, I just lost it. Not OU, but Wesleyan. Tell me. Sorry about that. La Quinta. They had built La Quinta, which is a beautiful building, and which was a home, and now it's a part of Oklahoma Wesleyan. Okay, sorry about that, okay. Lois Strait is our next one, and I just missed one. Okay, Lois Strait was born January 26, 1907 in Bradford, Pennsylvania. Her parents were very rich, and they were Herbert Randall and Catherine Lois Haskell. So she was very pampered, and she loved going to the hospital and see all the little babies. So one time they took her to the hospital so she could see the babies, and then they took her up to her room, and she had an operation. So they knocked her out, and she came to, and she had all these gifts. All her room was filled with all kinds of gifts of flowers and everything like that. But she was one of the first female attorneys in Oklahoma. Lois's father was H.R. Strait, and he was the president of city service. So she ended up getting a job at her father's company. But if she wouldn't have had her father's company, she probably couldn't have found a job, because back then they did not like to have women lawyers, and they were very few and far between. But she also was president of the Washington County Bar Association. And she never married. She took care of her parents, and he lived happily just with them.
Well, she did marry Johnson.
Whoops. Oops, wait a minute, sorry about that. Oh, you're right, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
For years, she
Later in
didn't
life.
marry. She didn't marry until she was older.
That's right.
Yeah, you're right. And also, we have these books, and her name or her interview is in one of these. But these are called taproots, and we have them at the museum. They have 1 through 7, and they have all kinds of interesting stories about the different people. But anyway, so our next very famous person is Ruth Brown. So Ruth Brown became the librarian in 1919 of the Bartlesville area library. And although she chose not to marry, basically the people in the library and the patrons became her family. And she was a very caring and kind person. She basically would help the different people out. And she had a couple of children that she saw and that she really became fond of, and she was able to adopt them. Adopt one of them, Ellen Holiday, and then she became the foster mother of her older sister, Holly. But anyway, she felt that it wasn't right for the African Americans to not be able to come to the library and be able to eat at the, in the restaurants and places like that. So at one point, she took 2 of the children or young ladies that she knew, and she went to one of our restaurants, which was a cafeteria, and sat down with them. Of course, they were black, and they would not serve her. And so she ended up coming back. She was going to come back again if it wasn't too violent. But 2 weeks later, Senator Joseph McCarthy exploded on the national stage. And he was all against the communists and the Red Scare, and it got everything, to be a major problem. So they ended up saying that she had some books that were not correct, weren't, that were more communistic and everything. And some people were upset with her. A lot of it was because she was trying to get the blacks to be able to come to the library and also be able to eat and that kind of thing. But anyway, so there was a big disturbance. And at one point, the commissioners, some people believe that she had books in the library that were not appropriate. And at that time, the commissioners changed the city governing ordinance pertaining to the library, effective July 1st. The library board that had been there was dismissed. And they put a whole new set of members were appointed that were not supporters of Ruth Brown. And one of the guys, he even remarked, he was surprised that he was named to the board because he was a poor student and never used the library. But 2 weeks later, Miss Brown was summoned to an executive session of the city commissioners to answer questions, and then they ended up firing her. So there was a lawsuit brought, but she lost the case. It went all the way up to the Oklahoma Supreme Court. But she ended up going ahead and living in Collinsville, Oklahoma, and passed away in 1975. But yeah, she was a very dedicated woman. Oh, here's a fun one. This one is Coke. She always called her Coke, Meyer. Her name was Dorris, and they called her a friend to all. But the reason she was called Coke is because whenever she would go to the store when she was young, and she was Will Rogers' niece, all she wanted was a Coke. And so that became her name. And she was involved in the Pocahontas Indian Women's Club of Claremore, the Bartlesville Women's Indian Women's Club, the Tuesday Club, and then Will Rogers Memorial. She was also active in multiple historical societies, the American Legion Auxiliary and the National Museum of American Indians. But she was such a sweet woman. She came up here several times and did presentations and talked about her Uncle Will, where he would gather them all together and they would go to the store, or she remembered taking her to Ponca City when they had the dedication of the woman, the women's monument. But anyway, so she ended up passing away in when she was 97 years old, and she wrote a book, which was a great book. I Called Him Uncle Will, in 2012. But anyway, she was a very, very sweet woman. This is Della Craighead. And so if you're from the Bartlesville area and you went to school at the high school at a certain time period, you knew and loved Della. She was a high school English teacher, and in her obituary they wrote, William Wadsworth best described her, a perfect woman, nobly planned, to warn, to comfort, and command, and yet a spirit still and bright, with something of angelic light. Although she would be first to protest these words regarding her, she would be the first to compliment the words themselves. She was born August 17, 1917, in Durant, Oklahoma. She married Emery Mays Craighead in 1941, and she began teaching in Bartlesville in 1958. She started full-time at College High in 1960, and during this time she completed her master's degree at the Tulsa University. She later taught at Sooner High beginning in 1966. Della was the first inductee of the Bartlesville Educators Hall of Fame, and with the induction speech given by Rita Thurman Bones, College High class of 1965, Della retired in 1979, and she was very religious, and she passed away March 31st, 2018. So this one is a very interesting woman. Her name is Barbara Sokolowska. She is either a K-I or a K-A. They did it both ways. Tillman. But anyway, she was born in 1930, let's see, 34, I believe. But anyway, she was with the underground the Polish underground. And her father, he owned a factory and hired people to, so that he could hide them in the forest to keep them from being taken away by the Nazis. He built bridges and railroads. She saw the construction of the Majdanek concentration camp near Lublin, Poland. And she said at one point her father left with only the clothes on his back. But before he left, he and his servants buried their valuables and they returned afterwards and were able to dig them up, and they were still there, which is a nice shock. During the Warsaw Uprising, she carried messages through the sewers and threw Molotov cocktails at German vehicles. The reason they used the children to be able to send the messages through the sewers, they were expendable, because it was a terrible, terrible time, and you can just imagine what all she had gone through. But she's one of the women that Joe Todd had interviewed, and so it was really quite the thing. Okay, we have Charolette Lyke. So Charolette Lyke was. She began her ballet career in Bartlesville as a student in the Runyon School of Dance. She attended the University of Tulsa, where she earned a Bachelor of Arts in piano. She returned to Bartlesville to begin teaching ballet. Charlotte's career teaching ballet spanned a period of 62 years. She taught for 20 years before she came to work as the ballet mistress of the Bartlesville Civic Ballet in 1971. She was later promoted to the artistic director of Bartlesville Civic Ballet, a role she served for over 40 years. In 2011, she received the Lifetime Honor of Artistic Director Emerita from the Bartlesville Civic Ballet, the highest honor bestowed to a ballet company. But she was a dynamite woman, and she, I hear a snicker out there, but she definitely had an iron will, but she put on beautiful productions, and she was a very strong woman. When I was teaching over at St. John's, her and she was helping with making the production, and her and the gentleman that was in charge of the music, they were supposed to work together. That didn't happen. There were a lot of arguments. But she also donated a lot of most of her nutcrackers and some of her Christmas tree from her ballet studio. But she was quite the lady. Margaret Withers Teague. So she was born in July 29, 1910, and attended the Missouri University of Columbia and earned a degree in journalism. After she graduated, she worked as a reporter for the Liberty Chronicle. Her journalism career spanned 5 decades. She worked for the Gilchrist Museum in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the El Paso Museum of Art, the El Paso Police Department International Affairs Division, the International Petroleum Exposition, KVOO Radio, and the Tulsa Trib and the Bartlesville Examiner Enterprise, and K1. And in 1964, she became the inaugural museum curator of the History Room, which later would become our Bartlesville Area History Museum. And it was at the public library. And it was established with initial grants from the Frank Phillips Foundation. In 1967, Phillips Foundation and the City of Bartlesville commissioned Margaret Teague to author 2-volume history of Washington County and surrounding area. So this is an updated book of hers. The one that she wrote was 2 volumes, and it was just double-spaced and just typewritten. But what the people from the museum did, Debbie Neese and some of the other ones, they took all of her information and they turned it into a book with pictures. There's pictures, and what's fabulous is there's an index that has all kinds of information. Anybody that was mentioned in that book is in the index. And so they sell that at the museum here. And she passed away in 1994. We just have one more person, Ruby Craner. Now Ruby, she was one of our history heroes, along with Margaret Teague. She was born December 13, 1917, and she was a local historian, author, and curator of the Bartlesville Area Library History Room from 72 to 83. And she had a passion and a gift for preservation of history. She wrote a pictorial history of Washington County, Talking Tombstones. So this is my Talking Tombstones. As you can tell, I've been doing more research on it here. But this was a great book that gave information about all the different cemeteries in Washington County. And then also there were lots of little stories towards the beginning about different things that went on with the history of it. She had, let's see, pioneer profiles. She did Caney River Valley ghost towns and some old Delaware obituaries. So she wrote a bunch of different books. Her work was fundamental to the preservation of the history of our community. And in 1977, Ruby was honored with the Washington County Historical Society Historians of the Year Award. She passed in December 2nd, 2005. And there are so many more wonderful people that we could talk about. And but I tried to keep with the ones that had already passed away. But each and every day, someone does something special. And there's a lot of women out there that do a lot that sometimes people don't know about. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.